This is Arab Talk on KPOO 89.5 FM in San Francisco. This is Arab Talk with Jess and Jamal. I'm Jess Hannam.
And I'm Jamal Dajani.
Well, Jamal, we have a really interesting show today. You're going to be speaking with the founder of the Palestine Museum in the United States, Mr. Faisal Saleh, who is the founder of this museum. It's in Woodbridge, Connecticut, and he has a very compelling story, and it's going to be really interesting to hear about it. But afterwards, I'm telling you, the kind of emergence of more progressive elements within the Democratic Party is highlighting the hypocrisy of U.S. foreign policy when it comes to Palestine. Because on the one hand, we're finding out that the U.S. State Department is going to sanction the Egyptians for, quote, human rights abuses and withhold some of the hundreds of millions of dollars they send to the Egyptians. Yet, they continue to fund the apartheid state of Israel on a regular basis, who are committing atrocities, human rights violations, and acts of terror and torture against Palestinian political prisoners. So you have the Squad, AOC, Rashida Tlaib, and others who want to stop shipments of these massive human-destroying bombs to the Israeli military, and they're getting pushback. So we're going to be talking about the political kind of divide that's happening now, not between Democrats and Republicans, Jamal, but within the Democratic Party, between the progressive forces and the forces who are still committed to supporting an apartheid practice.
That's right, Jess. And as you know, U.S. foreign aid has conditions. It's conditional.
It always does, yeah.
You're not supposed to give foreign aid to countries that violate human rights. That's one of the conditions. You're not supposed to use military aid to bomb children and civilians. That's another condition. And so we'll examine this. And of course, first we're going to go to our interview with great person, Faisal Saleh, someone who dedicated his life. I mean, this wasn't his career, really.
Right.
And basically established a very important and a very unique museum, the Palestine Museum in Woodbridge, Connecticut. Let's watch the interview. The Palestine Museum in Woodbridge, Connecticut was founded in 2018 as a labor of love by Faisal Saleh. Faisal's family of 11 children were made refugees from their ancestral home and extensive fruit orchards in Salama on the outskirts of Jaffa during the 1948 Nakba. Saleh's family fled to Al-Bira in the West Bank, and this is where Faisal grew up until coming to the United States on an academic scholarship and later received his bachelor's from Oberlin, followed by an MBA from the University of Connecticut. Joining us on Arab Talk is the visionary and founder, Faisal Saleh. Welcome, Faisal.
Thank you, Jamal. Pleased to be with you.
So how did you come up with the idea of establishing the Palestine Museum? What brought you to open an art museum, since on the surface it's completely unrelated to your background?
Well, I was in the U.S. For such a long time and did all my time. I spent it working, keeping my nose to the grindstone, like they say. And after being there like 45 some years, I felt it was time to do something for Palestine. And I kind of looked around to see, what's there to do and what might be interesting. Not much really caught my attention. At some point, I came across some people who were trying to start a museum for several years. I joined briefly and then quickly realized, they're not on the right track. And so I struck out on my own in 2017, spent about 9 months building the idea of the museum. And 9 months later, I opened the Palestine Museum US in April of 2018.
So now it's 3 years from your opening of the museum. How has the public response been? I mean, one nice touch you have is the videography of visitors talking about their experience.
The response has been great, and over the 3 years, the museum evolved from being a local institution in a small town called Woodbridge outside of New Haven, Connecticut, to being more of a global institution. Thanks to the COVID crisis, we, along with the rest of the world, have discovered the advantage of virtual technology, and the museum was able to capitalize on that quickly and developed a great international audience in many countries. So the museum was extremely well received, not just by members of the Palestinian community in the United States, but also by Americans in general. Our audience has been about half of Palestinian origin, and the other half non-Palestinian, non-Arab origin. And those statistics are really great. They are what we were after, and we continue to cater to both audiences. The museum is very well known, not just in the United States, but also in many of the countries in Europe and in the Middle East and Palestine in particular. This year, we are working on a very ambitious art project, which is to create a presence at the Venice Biennale, which is the world's greatest art event.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah. And we expect to be there when the Biennale opens in April of 2022.
So, I say we Palestinians living in diaspora carry the Nakba with us. That's the catastrophe. I noticed that you have a time since Nakba timer on your website. Explain to me what's the message behind that time since Nakba.
Yeah, first of all, we like to call it the Nakba clock. Like this, you have the doomsday clock, and then there's the Nakba clock. And the Nakba clock is ticking. When you go on our website, you see it second by second. The seconds are ticking by. Each second, it's another slice of time that Palestinians have been deprived of their homeland. And our losses and damages are accumulating on a daily basis. There is a value for what we've lost, and there is a cost for it. So far, we have been suffering the cost. There will come a day when we will demand reimbursement for our damages, and the clock is tracking what those damages will be.
So, through your exhibit, do you feel you have enough pieces of that clock? Let me just say that I have not been to the museum. I've studied it through your website. The person who told me about your museum when you first opened was my wife. She's from New England, and she's from Boston. She actually drove with her mother to your museum, when pre-COVID, let's put it this way, when things were open. And I'm trying to kind of like, if someone would come there, where do you take them on their journey?
We take them on a variety of stops, and it's not that we present a fully detailed, sequential, chronological history of events, etc., but rather we show certain images and certain views that are carefully curated, that when they're put all together, they create a very moving image, whether you're a Palestinian or a non-Palestinian. And they convey the message that Palestinians have been subjected to all kinds of injustices, and Palestinians have Artists and talented people, just like any other people. And we are human and deserve to be treated as humans, and we should be treated like humans. The message is complex, and it's not delivered directly. It is delivered through the arts, and we define the arts very broadly. We have identified 13 different types of arts that the Palestinians excel at, and the museum goes to great lengths to feature those different arts. We recently declared the last week of April as Palestine Art Week, and we have now reserved that on the calendar. And each Palestine Art Week includes 7 days of intensive programming about Palestinian arts. And just so people know what I'm talking about, we see the arts not just as paintings and sculptures, but also as photography, as calligraphy, as music, cuisine, dance, debke, embroidery, poetry, literature, novels, you name it. We have 13 different forms of that art that we celebrate and where Palestinians excel at. And we want the world to know the depth and extent to which Palestinians excel in these arts.
So the artists that you feature, I mean, are they, do they live in the United States, or you just seek out artists from everywhere, from Palestinians in diaspora in Europe, in the Middle East, or even from Palestine?
We have artists from all around the world. We have artists from the United States, from Europe, from Chile. We have artists from Palestine, and Palestine, as you know, has different segments from the West Bank, artists from Gaza, artists from the pre-48 Palestine. We have artists from Jordan, from Syria and Damascus, from Lebanon, and some other countries. We make no distinction to the place where Palestinians reside. We reside all over the world. The entire planet is our residence. As you know, we scattered everywhere in the diaspora. So the residence is not important. We want to all be seen as Palestinians without any distinctions among us based on our residences. Palestinians hold dozens and dozens of different kind of passports. The passports we hold are immaterial. What's in our heart is Palestine, and that's what we want people to know.
Do you face difficulties bringing these artists or their work to the United States?
Not whatsoever. I can bring a piece of art from Gaza in 4 days.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I can bring a piece of art from Kuwait in 2 days, from Dubai, from Belgium, from Luxembourg. We have artists in all those places, and we're able to get the art from there. We have not experienced any difficulty. There's one place that's kind of a bit takes longer to get it from, which is Damascus and Beirut, because there's some shipping restrictions on those countries, in which case the artwork gets shipped to somebody in Dubai, and from Dubai we ship it to the United States.
What is the most unanticipated thing you have experienced or learned during this adventure, really?
Believe it or not, I didn't realize that there were so many talented Palestinians around. I knew we have a lot of talented people. I knew we had a lot of artists, but I had no idea how many artists there are and how many filmmakers there are, how many novelists, how many writers. There are thousands and thousands of thousands. It is incredible the amount of talents Palestinians have. And it is time for the world to begin to uh, to know that talent. I mean, we have opera singers like you won't believe. We brought in an opera singer, Mariam Tamari, to perform at the French Embassy in Washington, D.C. In an incredible performance. She sang in 6 languages. And she amazed everybody in the audience. We brought pianists, world-class pianists, to perform in multiple locations. And we have the talent. We just need to be able to present it to people in a way that capitalizes on the talents and not diminish it by the other extraneous things that some of us often do and try to and end up kind of self-defeating the purpose. What's really important in the arts world is to focus on Palestinians as artists. And that is the message we want to get through. Yes, we're Palestinians, but we don't need to carry flags everywhere. The fact we're Palestinian is just as powerful. The flag is something in addition, but it's more important for people to see us as Palestinian, as artists, as talented people, because that is the message we are trying to deliver to the world. We're not the helpless victims, and we're not the terrorists. We're not the extremists. We're people just like anybody else, and there's no question about that. And we're out there to show people that's who we are.
Would you say that this journey took you to your own self-experience and discovery? Because you've mentioned that you were surprised to find about so many artists and talented people. So did you learn more about your own culture?
Of course, every day I learn more things. Every day I meet a new artist. I meet so many people. I can't really remember all the names. I have to write them down. And I get calls from people and say, "Hi, Faisal, how are you?" And I said, "Please, could you tell me who you are?" And of course, when you get my age, memory becomes a little bit of a factor in remembering things. However, I enjoy spending hours on the phone with Palestinians in different parts of the world, talking about Palestine and reminiscing about such and such street in Ramallah and which such a building and where we used to walk around and what stores were nearby, and kind of going through a map of Ramallah in my head and El Bire, and remembering all the shopkeepers, all the stores, all the times we've had there, the teachers I had, the students who were my classmates, and it just brought all that stuff back. And of course, it reminded me of my family and my parents, and I realized things now in hindsight that I didn't know when I was living there. I didn't realize the depth of anguish that my parents had and the frustration over losing their land and not being able to make a good living, and all the challenges of raising 11 children. Just to give you an example, in 1967 we were run over by the Israeli army during the 67 war, and after that, we were able to travel back to Palestine, where we're from. And of course, I wasn't there. I was born afterwards. But so I went with my parents in a taxi to visit our village. We got out of the taxi, and for 2 minutes, my parents looked around where our house used to be. And then they ran back in the taxi and says, "Let's get out of here. We can't take it." They could not stand being there. It's just that level of anguish is unimaginable, and the level of pain that our parents suffered without talking about it. They've talked about the good times they had there, but they never talked about the pain that they suffered.
Actually, this is a, a very common theme. I went with my father actually to look at the home in Jerusalem, the house he grew up, and it was a very emotional experience, even though the house still exists and, of course, occupied now. But then I know people who in the States have resisted going back. People who came here after the Nakba, and they haven't been to Palestine because they said they want to keep their old memories. I mean, do you feel there is an escape when people come to your museum kind of looking at paintings and old photographs and things like this? That does that take them back? Are they, in a way, find the museum as a sanctuary for their good memories?
Yes, and more so than that. When they walk into the museum, they tell us, you have great things in the museum and on the walls, but you could have had just, shreds of burlap on the walls, and we would have loved it. He says, this is the only place that's ours. For years and years and years, we went to other people's museums. We didn't have any, and so they feel that they're back to something that belongs to them. It's part of the identity that they've been longing for, belonging and having things that belong to us. And this is one of the new things. And a lot of people come and say, oh, this is like being in Palestine, when they see all these photographs from 1920 and 1930 and 1944, and see, our ancestors who were living there, who were resisting the British, and they see, Palestinians injured in demonstrations against the British and lying on the ground. They say, it's like being in Palestine today. Oh.
Have you been to the Waldorf Hotel in Bethlehem? That's the museum that was put together by Bansky. Do you see any, if you've been there, or have people mentioned to you that there are similarities between the two?
They haven't mentioned similarities. I haven't been there because the last time I was in Palestine was in 1999, and I don't think it was there at the time. And I did visit Palestine. I did visit Bethlehem at that time, and went over in Jerusalem, etc. But I really don't know a whole lot about it other than what I read on social media and what I see. But there's something different about the Palestine Museum US than any other museum. It is not run and designed and operated just like any other museum. We have certain approaches. We want to try to represent the largest number of Palestinian artists we can. We look for excellence, but we have a bigger mission and a bigger goal to accomplish than most museums do.
Did you face any difficulties? We know when Palestinians put something together to discuss Al-Nakba, even a lecture at the university campus, they face resistance. Did you face any resistance?
I have not encountered any resistance. We've never had any of our programs censored. We put on daring programs. We screened the film Jenin Jenin, for instance, which is banned in Israel. We screen a lot of films about the Nakba. We've screened films that were made by the PLO in Lebanon in the late 70s, early 80s, and we've never had any trouble. Nobody's ever challenged what we're doing or tried to stop us. We have an exhibit of Gaza children's drawings from the operation cast led in 2008, 2009, that for 8 years people tried to exhibit it in the US and nobody could because Israel would shut it down every time through their supporters. The last attempt was at Oakland Children's Museum,
Right.
where the exhibit was canceled a week before it opened. Now we ended up with all those drawings. They're like hot potatoes, and they've been on exhibit in the museum since the day we opened. And we have not had any. We are a museum. We display art, and we don't get challenged. We are telling the Palestinian story through the arts, and I have not had any difficulty doing that whatsoever.
Well, this is great because, I mean, I've witnessed these challenges by the Israel lobby and their supporters in the US, and also by revisionist historians, that especially when it comes to discussing something about al-Nakba, really.
Yeah, I think it may have something to do with how we present our material. Like, for instance, we have a mosaic of Razan and Najjar, and as a memorial for her. We have a huge 15-foot wide memorial for Rachel Corrie. Nobody ever said anything about any of those things, and I'm happy to address any challenge of the Rachel Corrie memorial. So this is a young lady, an American girl, went to support Palestinians in Gaza, and the Israeli bulldozers killed her. We have a memorial for her. Anybody has a question about that? Come talk to me.
Tell us about the silent auction of Palestinian art in saving lives in Palestine, taking place, I know, in the Bay Area this week and in Orinda.
Orinda, yes. We were approached by a couple of people, asked us if we would participate and help with that. And we've immediately agreed to co-sponsor the event and provide a small art exhibit on site there, but a big art show as in the form of an online virtual auction, which went live Sunday night, and it is running right now. We have artists from all over the place, and there are two types of art that's being offered in the auction: original artwork, and also prints and posters, which tend to be of a very affordable price. You know, they start like around $50, they go $100, $200, up to $500. And the original artwork obviously starts at more like $1,500, $2,000, going up as much as $10,000 or more. But the artwork is excellent, and all that artwork is residing at the Palestine Museum currently. And we have twice as much artwork as we have space for, and we do have about 8,000 square feet of exhibit space at the museum. It's not a small place. So we hope people would be interested in participating in the auction and supporting the cause for which the auction is dedicated. I was wondering if, I guess people can go to the museum's website and we will have information there. But they can.
And the website is?
PalestineMuseum.us.
We'll do that. We'll put a link on our website. But people also should learn about the auction, and we definitely people should learn more about your museum. Yeah. Going to your website, Palestine Museum. .us. Well, I wish you the best luck. I think it's a great thing, and I want to thank you, Faisal Saleh, for coming on Arab Talk.
Thank you so much. Great pleasure. Hope to see you again. Goodbye.
Well, that's the voice in the face of Faisal Saleh, who is the founder and, kind of the person who's breathed life, blood, and money into the founding of the Palestine Museum in the United States in Woodbridge, Connecticut. It's a compelling story, Jamal, and, brings to light the kind of awesome history of artists, of poets, of the artistry of Palestinians, not only in Palestine, but in the diaspora. And now we have a home here in the United States for some of that history. Hopefully it won't get bombed in ways that other of our precious historical artifacts and memories have had to go through in the last 73 years. But this is a great story.
You know, the interesting thing that if you go to the website, which is the Palestine Museum.us, which I urge everyone to go there, first thing that you'll notice is a Nakba clock.
Right.
And that's the first thing you turn on. It's like he has his countdown starting from the Nakba. How many years, how many days, how many months, how many days, how many hours, and which I found very unique. But basically, he tries to reconstruct really the rich Palestinian history from different sources, be it arts, poetry, music, photography, Palestinians living in diaspora, Palestinians living in Palestine. He gets things from all over, from Gaza, even though you know how difficult it is to get things out of Gaza. He gets them right here in the United States. He's a very busy man, and it's a
but
very.
This is a lifelong passion, Jamal. This is not his job, but this is his lifelong passion.
He's someone who came to the United States like everyone else, got his finished his university studies, got his master's degree, built a career, became very successful, and you know what?
He's giving back.
He's giving back. This is his whole idea, you know, and
it's brilliant, and we have to give him a lot of credit. And by the way, you know, if you go to that website, PalestineMuseum.us, there are ways to support the museum, which we encourage our listeners to do.
And also they have a special event, which we talk about it, which is happening in the Bay Area, at Orinda, to be specific. And this will be posted, details about this event will be posted on our website. And also we talked about it. So I highly recommend supporting the museum, its endeavors, its work. Go online, and hopefully if you're in New England or in New York or wherever, it's not too difficult to go to Woodbridge, where you and I are kind of far, 3,000 miles away. But if you're on the East Coast, it's very accessible.
Well, here's the thing. I've been to Woodbridge. So I know Woodbridge, ironically. It's a very beautiful suburb, you know, outside of, you know, where Yale University is. It's very pretty, very beautiful, and it's a perfect place.
Well, you know, now you're on your next trip to the East Coast, Jess, and I'm making it a goal to go there.
Me too.
Winifred, my wife, she's been there. That's how I learned about it. And she drove from Boston to go to the museum. Wow. Of course, this was pre-COVID, when people could go around. And so hopefully when travel becomes easier and then we'll get to see it. But in the meantime, go to the website. There's a lot on that website. I mean, everything is done now virtually.
And the history that he's documenting is just awesome. And, I made that comment in the beginning about I hope it doesn't get, bombed or destroyed. It was only half a joke, Jamal, because you and I both know historically one of the things that the Israelis have done is to try to erase our history by bombing libraries, museums, documents. They've done that historically. They've tried to, change the names of Arab cities and given them Hebrew names, or streets that have Arab names and changing them into Hebrew names. I mean, all this kind of...
Well, that's why Faisal preserves this, right?
Exactly.
That's his mission, really.
Right. So we need to give him as much support as possible. We encourage our listeners to go to the website, see the museum, and do what you can to support the Palestine Museum.
All right, so you're listening to Arab Talk on KPOO San Francisco. We're moving to our next topic, Jess. I want to ask you a question. Which countries are the biggest recipients of U.S. foreign aid? I mean, it's a very rudimentary question.
Let's see. I'm going to take a wild guess and say the apartheid state of Israel and Egypt.
Yeah, well, there's
Maybe Jordan?
There is a little change, yeah. So Israel, and we're not talking about we're talking about straight U.S. aid. We're not talking about loan guarantees and all the extras that somehow make it there. And we can only go to the year 2019 because there's always a lag of time of reporting accurate numbers. Like, so for 2021, you have to use the figures from what is planned for 2020. And the United States gives 43 billion plus or take in foreign aids globally.
Right.
Okay. And so Israel gets about $3.3 billion, Jordan $1.52 billion, Egypt $1.53 billion.
Okay,
And then-
so it's the Israelis, the Jordanians, then the Egyptians, but the next one is far behind, isn't it?
What I'm saying, and that's the billions stop. So the billions stop here, and then the next one is start getting like half a billion, 482 million, and so forth. But basically, the lion's share out of that budget, 70% of that budget approximately goes to military. It's really spent, like, for example, you see countries like in Africa, just like Zambia and Mozambique, most of the money goes into food, into the environment, into water, whatever. But those countries, they really get a big chunk in military aid. So the U.S. government has specific rules, as you know, about receiving military aid or as receiving aid in general, that you must protect human rights, and you must not abuse our military aid in killing civilians.
Those are the two major preconditions, Jamal. I mean, there's a third precondition, but those are the two main conditions. And maybe the third one that I was going to speak to is that you can't attack, imprison, or oppress political opponents. That should be part of the human rights.
That's under the human rights umbrella.
Right.
So
that's something that the United States, in most cases, takes very seriously.
Yeah, so there are two things going on at the same time. That's why we're talking about them today. One, facing pressure on human rights, supposedly because the Biden administration, I want to remind everyone, Biden, when he came, he made promises, and he said human rights are going to be his number one issue. I mean, this is basically an important goal for the Biden administration. So now the Biden administration is facing pressure to condition foreign aid to Egypt because of, Abdel Fattah Sisi, the Egyptian, president. There's a widespread criticism over increased restrictions, and this is the newest thing. I mean, we're not even going on the press and freedom of expression. We're not talking about all other human rights abuses, like how he came to power and what happened after that, and putting in jail opponents, and the death of the former president Morsi in jail. But now, all of a sudden, you have all this noise and all these Congress people and senators criticizing the Biden administration and telling them to impose new conditions on security aid to Egypt. That's very important. And, because, we're talking, like I said, $1.3 billion in military assistance. This would determine that the United States provides Egypt every year.
Right.
Makes sense?
I could never understand why they would give the Egyptian government and military so much money. I mean, you and I know that basically it's lining the pockets of the military-industrial complex in Egypt. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi is the former, head of the Egyptian military. He's a general. And we know that among the wealthiest people in Egypt, Jamal, are the top military leaders who own a lot of businesses, own a lot of land, and control a lot of not just the military, but the economy of Egypt. So a lot of this money is going into the pockets of the Egyptian military. And for what reason, Jamal? You and I know it's in order to keep the fake peace deal with the Israelis alive. There's really
Actually,
no other reason.
You said the key word, because a lot of people question foreign aid to Egypt, and they don't understand that foreign aid to Egypt, unlike Israel, which kind of grew into our biggest,
recipient.
We are, the United States is Israel's biggest cash cow.
Right.
But for Egypt, that was part of the condition of the Camp David Agreement.
That's
Part
right.
of the Camp David Agreement is that you create peace between Israel and Egypt, and in return, Egypt receives that aid because also they got rid of the Soviets. So we replaced the Soviets as their benefactor.
Right.
So it wasn't accidental, kind of we have this lobby in the United States, this big Egyptian lobby or this Arab lobby. It was part of this whole Camp David Agreement to get rid of the USSR and replace it with basically American influence in the region. And so they are our second largest, or they've been our second largest recipient for many years. And they'll probably be, I think there is just an exceptional year for Jordan this year to get more money than Egypt. But historically, after Israel, Egypt received the most money. So anyway,
but Jamal, let's keep in mind. I mean, politically, we should unpack this and understand it. Why go after the Egyptians now? What is the motivation for these senators and these Congress people to kind of take a stand against Sisi and the Egyptian government? They've been corrupt. They've had a horrible human rights record. They imprison most of the political opposition in Egypt. They've been cracking down. They have a horrible, public health infrastructure. People are getting COVID, at an excessively high rate. I mean, the income disparities in Egypt are much greater. So, but this has been going on for years and years and years. So why go after Sisi now? What is this?
Well, exactly. Here is the question. Why go after Egypt now when we give Israel a pass on all its human rights violations
every day?
On the killing of children, on the imprisonment of minors, on its siege on Gaza, on its apartheid after Israel has been certified by Human Rights Watch as an apartheid state.
But using American money to kill civilians, Jamal, with bombs.
Well, that's why we're talking about these two cases, because in this case, Congress is putting a lot of pressure on both Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who, by the way, have promised to put core values at the center of the Biden's foreign policy after 4 years when President Donald Trump often dismissed reports of abuses in other countries. And then they mention here, for whatever reason, Sisi and Vladimir Putin. They don't talk anything about Israel. And then meanwhile, Biden, he also promised in reference to Sisi that there will be, and I'm quoting here, no more blank checks for Trump's favorite dictator.
Oh, wow.
What about all these blank checks to apartheid Israel? What about these blank checks to apartheid Israel? That's the question.
But this is why your question, Jamal, is so important and why we're having this discussion, because prior to the last few years, there's nobody and nothing in Congress, no counterbalance that would counter this hypocrisy among a Democratic president, someone who represents the Democrat Party. There's no counterweight. They would get away with it. They would condemn, Egypt and Sisi and give the Israelis a pass. But we now have a different reality on the ground in Congress, Jamal. Maybe not in the Senate, but among congressional representatives, we have really large, significant representation from progressive forces represented by the squad, and then even people beyond the squad, and like Cori Bush and some others. So the thing is, Jamal, they're questioning. You have these progressive elements now who are saying in Congress, we should not send this money because Israel is killing children and women and civilians with the money that we're paying them, and this is unacceptable. So I think, as we said at the beginning, this is not Democrat versus Republican. This is Democrat on Democrat analysis and disagreements, and it's gonna get very intense, Jamal. When you think about it.
So just to make this clear, you're talking now about the second case. We
Yes.
talked about the campaign to stop foreign aid to Egypt, or condition foreign aid to Egypt because of human rights. Now, the second campaign, which is basically you're talking about House progressives, which basically they did that before. They're renewing their effort to block bomb deliveries to Israel.
Yes.
And to be clear, these are representatives AOC Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Mark Pocan, who are leading a renewed effort to prohibit the delivery of U.S.-made bombs to Israel. So these three progressive legislators submitted an amendment just to the annual National Defense Authorization Act, which is the NDAA, that would require the Biden administration to hold the export of Boeing-made joint direct attack munitions and small diameter bombs to Israel for a year. The bombs were used, and the reason the bombs were used by the Israeli Air Force to strike targets in Gaza during the May's escalation, killing women, children, and civilians.
Yes.
So this is a more recent, because they've done that last year. But we know, that's the thing. You see, that's why we're talking about these two, because given the overwhelming support and all these Israel surrogates or apex surrogates in Congress, it's unlikely that the amendment, which was, by the way, published this Tuesday on the House Rules Committee's website, it's unlikely it will make it into the final draft of the NDAA.
But it's important, Jamal, and that's why we're talking about it, because things are different now. Things have changed. As I said before, it used to be that the Congress, Democrat and Republican, had a blank check that they would just hand over to the Israelis without any pushback from anybody. And for the first time in recent history, at least, I don't want to say forever, because in the late 40s and early 50s and, prior to 1960, there was additional pressure put on the Israelis, pretty minimal. But we know that starting in the 70s, 80s, and especially into the 90s, literally, it looks like a blank check has been handed over to the Israelis with no opposition between Democrats and Republicans, where they disagree about everything. So here we have, for the first time in recent political history, Jamal, an effort within the Congress to call out the hypocrisy, to call out this fake call for human rights and accountability, to get, support and international aid from the United States, because the Israelis get the most. Yet you could make the argument, I can make the argument, that of all the countries, even comparing, like Putin's Russia and, what's happening in China, Israel is pretty close to the top when it comes to violations of human rights, attacks on civilians, women, and children. And yet the blank check, the money keeps flowing from Washington to Tel Aviv.
So we're talking about $735 million worth of bombs to Israel.
That's
These
unbelievable.
bombs made by Boeing, yeah. And of course, this is it's subject now of unprecedented, basically, congressional scrutiny. It faced it in May during Israel's deadly bombing campaign, and as we said, targeting the Gaza Strip. Representative Ocasio-Cortez and Tlaib and Pocan, they introduced this resolution to block the export of Boeing's bombs to Israel. Senator Bernie Sanders also introduced his own version in the Senate. And then Sanders dropped the effort to force a vote on the bomb sale once it became clear that the State Department had already granted an export license. There's a whole game, an export license to Boeing for the sale. So kind of like the State Department said, well, we don't want to hurt Boeing because they're going to make money. They're getting $735 million, and we've already issued them the export license. So, but the members of Congress expressed anger at the time that the State Department granted the export license before giving Congress a chance to weigh in.
Exactly.
So Israel, this is the thing. Boeing gets issued the export license. This matter has never been brought up in front of Congress to debate whether we were going to give an export license to Boeing and whether Congress is going to examine Israel's stand on human rights. And so this is the very first time you see this. And I tell you one thing, Jess.
Yeah.
This conversation that we're having, 99.9% of Americans don't know anything about.
But they
haven't
Jamal.
heard anything about it.
Yeah,
that
and
there
they
is,
should.
That this is happening, that this every year we give a carte blanche to weapon manufacturers and, with the U.S. taxpayers' money for Israel to purchase whatever they need to replace the bombs and the ammunitions they use on Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere.
Yeah, Jamal, and that's why I think this segment that we're doing on it is so important. But I have a suspicion that even if that 99.9% of Americans don't realize what's happening, even if we move the dial to 95% and 5% know about it, it's part of the change that's happening in Congress. Because as congressmen and women get younger, they become more progressive. As they become more progressive, and you and I have seen the data from the Pew Research group and other groups who are doing polling on attitudes towards Palestine and the Palestinian issue. And each year, Jamal, more and more Americans become pro-Palestinian. More and more Americans question the reasoning and the rationale behind supporting such a aggressive, egregious, human rights violator as apartheid Israel. So, this is a marathon, Jamal. The political changes that are going to happen with apartheid practices that the Israelis engage in and being confronted by these progressive forces in Congress, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And
I like that.
And we're in the first mile. And when is the last time you heard any congressman or woman bring up something like this, Jamal, in the last, decade? This is really, we need to give credit where credit is due.
And then there is, of course, Representative McCollum, who actually brought something similar about also human rights violation and the use of U.S. military aid to target children. And that's actually one of her campaigns. So you have an element of progressives in Congress who are speaking against these abuses.
Absolutely, Jamal. That's going to keep happening. And we're going to continue to follow this story, Jamal. This is not the end. This is just the beginning of the story. We're in the first mile here of a, 23 and a half mile race. So, this is just the beginning. And more progressive people are going to be elected to Congress. And it's going to become, the idea is to make support of Israel toxic to your ability to get elected or reelected in the Congress and the Senate. I know that sounds like a crazy idea, but that's going to be the attitude. Why are we funding such a heinous government that gets away with killing women, children, and civilians with our tax dollars? And if you add to it, Jamal, the billions of dollars we've given Israelis when, 20 to 30 million American children go to bed hungry every night, once you factor in that calculation, or don't have adequate health care or, don't have the protections that most other children should have anywhere else in the world, it may give pause to people's unflagging support for these, for these atrocities that the Israelis, continue to commit.
You're absolutely right. And lastly, just a quick mention, the now unsuccessful Gavin Newsom recall election has cost the state of California, because we're talking about taxpayers' money, $300 million.
And on that tragic note, with the greatest income inequality of any state in the union being in California, our homeless problem, our inability to feed and clothe, hundreds of thousands of children just in California, to spend $300 million on these delusional, recall elections. I mean, if you listen to what some of the recall candidates were talking about, even before the results came out, Jamal, the lead recall candidate, Larry Elder, saying that there was fraud. This is even before the votes were counted. So,
that's the crazy thing. That's what exactly all this money that's wasted on the military to give foreign aid to Israel and other states who abuse human rights. The money we waste on a recall election in California, money that can go to build new schools, to feed the hungry, to take care of the homeless crisis that we have here.
It's unbelievable. Or the fires that we have in California. Do you know how much we could help with, fire control with $300 million? It's terrible. So, we'll talk a little bit more at our next episode on Arab Talk of that, but it's pretty disturbing.
You've been listening to Arab Talk on KPO San Francisco 89.5 FM. Go to our website, arabtalkradio.com, to download all our shows are right there, and we'll talk to you next week.
We'll see you next week.